In August of 2023, Lackadaisy, the popular webcomic about jazz cats, raised just over $2 million on BackerKit to fund the animated adaptation, well above its initial funding goal of $125,000. Despite the seemingly sufficient budget, after a year of production, the team is dependent on book sales, merchandise, and Patreon earnings to support their team. So what happened? How does an indie animated production get $2 million in funding and still struggle to produce 5 animated episodes? They had the indomitable power of furries on their side, so why wasn't it enough? Hey, what's up? I'm Gene. You might know me from Hyperboy or Planet Panic. I'm also the creator of Jellybox, an indie animation studio that you might know for our work on No XP, Number Lore, or those animation labor shorts that spawned so much yaoi. You may or may not be aware, but the animation industry isn't really doing too hot. Over the last few years, a combination of corporate mergers, overseas outsourcing, and massive layoffs has led to hundreds of animation workers losing their livelihoods, benefits, and savings, and I'm one of those people! This shit sucks! A common response to all of this is just go indie, or indie is the future. And it's really not that simple. While I do hope independent animation grows and becomes profitable, since I do own an animation studio, this is a far more difficult thing to do than people realize. Why? 'Cause of money! Independent animation is independent because it's free from corporate investment. But then where does the funding come from? Not everyone thinks about this part of Just Go Indie, but it needs to be talked about for indie to have a fighting chance. Let's talk about funding in indie animation.
Cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out, cash in, cash out.
The fuck is a skibbity?
Based on my experiences on Twixter and the YouTube comment sections, I'm really not well. Some animation fans think that announcing, "I'm starting an animation studio," means that some invisible force sends you a sack of cash to make whatever you want. Boy, I wish. I'd make a reboot of Reboot, but with a lot more of Enzo Matrix and a lot less of this freak. The simple truth is, it doesn't work like that. Indie animation is funded out of pocket at worst, and by complicated and stressful crowdfunding campaigns at best. To really break down and understand funding in the indie animation space, we need to talk about how animation makes money in the first place. The basic textbook definition of advertising is the action of calling something to the attention of the public, especially by paid announcements. But how does this apply to cartoons like The Sponge Man or The Yellow Family? How does it apply to cartoons that are broadcasted? While animated films are able to make their money from box office sales and subsequent merchandising, television animation makes its money the same way that all broadcast programs make their money, advertising. The Flintstones existed to sell cigarettes, He-Man existed to sell homoerotic action figures, and cartoons existed to sell shit like Nerf. I guess you could say it was Nerf or nothing. Basically, kids started flocking to Cartoon Network and other new and emerging kids channels because they liked cartoons, and studios took notice, pitching their network to product-slinging advertisers as an ideal place to market to kids. Thus, the 6 to 11 demographic was born. Yes, this pillar of animation, often cited as the most important demographic of the medium, holds such importance not because of the content of the shows, but because that's the age group that all those toy companies were marketing to, and that's an important distinction. The animation we grew up with only got greenlit because they could sell ads, and potentially merchandise, but we'll cover that later. However, the rise of ad-free streaming service models has eroded the television industry, and the high cost of animation has made it harder and harder to justify IP productions, much less anything original, which carries more risk without a built-in audience. So why does animation cost so much? Well, thanks to the Animation Guild, we know exactly the current acceptable wage minimums and how long productions take, so we can roughly estimate how much a 22-minute episode will cost. But because hearing a bunch of numbers is boring, here's some footage of me wrestling a gorilla. It's a metaphor or something. For an animation worker living in Los Angeles, current guild rates range anywhere from $1,200 to $3,350 a week, depending on the position. This information is readily available on the Animation Guild website, factoring in pre-production and post-production costs, because remember, animation production is not just the animators. A single 22-minute animated episode can cost anywhere from $575,000 to $1 million, depending on the complexity of the animation style. These wages might seem high to folks outside of California, but they've stayed mostly the same over the last decade or so, as the cost of living in LA has steadily gone up. Rent prices in LA have gone up around 65% in the last 10 years. Housing prices have gone up 280% since 2000, and food is costing people upwards of $300 a week. This doesn't account for the cost of owning and maintaining a car in a car-dependent city, the cost of raising and supporting a family, and exorbitant taxes on the middle class. Add to this the increasingly shorter length work contracts, and these wages are barely enough. Simply put, people who have dedicated their lives and careers to the animation industry can now barely afford to keep their lights on, much less put money into savings, buy homes, or start a family, effectively destroying animation as a sustainable career. This is what the Animation Guild has been fighting for all year and will continue fighting for years to come. #StandWithAnimation. So what does any of this have to do with indie animation? A lot of animation happens outside of LA, outside of the US, where the cost of living is much lower. And the internet allows for indie productions to work remotely, with people living in these more affordable parts of the world. But that doesn't solve all the problems. Animation is still labor, and animation workers deserve fair pay for their work, which brings us back to the issue of funding. How do you pay all these hard-working animators? Where do indie productions get the money if they're not selling ads? We spoke with both the creator and showrunner of Lackadaisy, and thanks to their gracious transparency, we gained some insight into what the production budget for such a gorgeous show looks like when made independently. Lackadaisy leads are paid $1,000 a week for their labor, and animators and artists are paid $800 a week. Factoring in pre-production, post-production, and animation, a single episode is estimated to cost no less than $250,000. Applying this to a 5-episode season, and assuming all kinds of taxes, massive fulfillment costs, and overhead, you can see how quickly that $2 million budget gets eaten up. Lackadaisy has been able to generate additional budget from book sales and merchandise, but even this often leads to criticism from parts of the fandom, accusing the producers of being a merch business. And this is simply put illogical. What do people think broadcast animation is? It's a merch business. Hell, even streaming cartoons have merch rollouts. Literally all big IP media has merch rollouts. Entertainment is a merch business, plain and simple. And the only difference with indie productions is that the money is going directly to pay the crew, not give a big CEO a giant salary. So without studio backing, how do indie creators fund their amazing shows? Tell us the secret, Gene! Tell us! Truth is, there is no secret. Independent animation is independent because it's working outside of the studio system, not beholden to the demands of execs and investors, which is a good thing. But it's also without financial backing, which means there's only two routes: crowdfunding or paying out of pocket. Folks still believe YouTube is lucrative, and it's aggressively not. The payouts have gotten worse and worse over the years, and there's very little revenue to gain even from having millions of followers. Sponsors are the closest equivalent to ad revenue, like the networks get, and even these numbers are dwindling. YouTube payout depends on how well your video does, and the algorithm demands you upload as much as possible, which works for cheaper content like video essays, but can't sustain the cost and time investment of animated productions. Now, some indie productions manage to strike gold and gain massive fandoms. This does help with merchandising, which can be very lucrative and help self-fund further production. However, with how fickle the internet is and how damaging algorithm-driven feeds are, this is not something anyone can depend on when starting out. And most indie productions never reach a point where merchandising is profitable. Man, this is dark, huh? Yeah, imagine living it. Between cable, streaming, and YouTube, animation fans have gotten used to getting their content for free. But there is another way. The closest sustainable model that I can think of is indie games. There's a lot of problems with that market too, mostly oversaturation. But there's a pay-to-play aspect that provides steady income for publishers and developers. So why are animation productions expected to just give everything for free on YouTube? Why aren't we charging people admission to watch our hard work so we can keep paying our teams to produce more? Prominent independent platforms like Try Guys, Nebula, Watcher, and Dropout are streaming services that are looking to eliminate the fickle middleman of the YouTube ad revenue system. They ask the fans to pay for their hard work. So why can't we do the same for animation? This system needs to change. If indie games can do this, if indie games can make that jump from free browser games to the Xbox Marketplace, to Steam, to PSN, etc., then this can happen with indie animation. But if we don't make these changes now, there's no chance of indie animation ever being able to survive purely on crowdfunding and merchandise that might not ever happen, and so on and so on. But hey, Gene! I'm an animation fan and I can't change any of that, so what am I supposed to do? It's very simple. Support new projects when you see them. Donate to Kickstarters, buy some plushies, and if you can't do that, be loud and vocal about the projects that you support. It takes some effort, but just watching a thing or liking it is frankly not enough. Projects spread by word of mouth and enthusiasm, so share your favorite indie projects across social media. Fighting against the algorithm is an uphill battle, so really share stuff, repost constantly, make fan cam TikToks and post about projects that you think everyone should support. Sharing and spreading the word costs nothing, but it means everything. Thank you so much for watching. We don't have a sponsor for this video, so if you learn anything from this and want to support us, consider donating to our Patreon or Ko-fi. Also, if you're an indie creator or studio and you're interested in running your crowdfunding campaign, we can help you. Jellybox's merchandising branch, Jellywares, will help you organize your campaign, provide merch coordination, and fulfillment. Send us an email at merch@jellybox.studio. Thanks to the Animation Guild for listing their wages on their website, and thanks to the Lackadaisy team for speaking with us. Next video, I'm going to talk about my reboot of Reboot and how hot grown-up Andrea was.
Can I take this off now?
Not until indie animation is fixed.